Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Did you know that because popcorn is salty, guests that eat it will become thirstier than usual and as a result buy more drinks? If you did know that, then you should reconsider, as this is a myth. There is no such thing as saltiness in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2. In this video I will discuss several myths and misconceptions, ranging from fake guest name cheats to rival parks, starting with how food and drink stalls work. There are several different myths around food and drink stalls, including one that I believed myself until about a week ago. As I mentioned in the intro, many people believe that some foods are saltier than others, which is not true. All foods reduce hunger and increase thirst and toilet at the same rate. This myth probably comes from the fact that Theme Park Inc., released in 2001, does give you the option to add more salt to foods. I don't know if that has actually any effect in the game, as I've never played it, but it is easy to see how the myth was born. The different food and drink items are not identical though, which is the misconception I had. The difference is in their consumption time. For example, a burger takes twice as long to finish as a bucket of popcorn, so it replenishes twice the amount of hunger and increases thirst and toilet by twice as much. Here is a complete list of all the consumption times of all the different foods and drinks. The toffee, apple and candy floss are the worst foods with just 50, and the chicken is the best with 170. The drinks have much less variance, which does make sense if you think about it. There's also a whole lot of confusion about whether guests have a preference for certain foods. Well, I can tell you that they do not. When guests are hungry or thirsty, they just locate the nearest food or drink stall and head for it. Here we have 1,000 very hungry guests walking to some food stalls. The path is long enough so that they will all select a food stall before arriving at them, meaning the ice cream stall is always the closest. And indeed, everyone buys ice cream. Even with the path changed so that they pass by the other stalls first, they still go for the ice cream, showing that they calculate distance as the crow flies, not as the path walks. There are two factors that influence whether a guest will actually buy the food though. Guests won't buy ice cream when it rains, so in the rain they will still walk up to it, but then they will refuse to buy it and then select a new food stall a little bit later. There are also different maximum prices for cold, normal and hot temperatures, but they only check that once they are at the stall trying to buy it. The next myth revolves around transport rides, and that is that guests will use transport rides to get to other parts of the park. This is not true. Guests see transport rides as just normal rides, no different from any other ride, with one exception. If a guest happens to walk into the queue line entrance of a free transport ride, it will always go on it. Guests that want to go home will never head for any ride, so this is to make sure that if you have an area of your park that's inaccessible by path, guests can still leave it if the ride there is free and a transport ride. Next up is the misconception about how rides attract guests to the park. Firstly, stats don't matter. Even though it would make sense for a big roller coaster with 10 excitement to attract more guests than a tiny boring loop, it doesn't. Every ride type attracts a certain number of guests, and it's always the same regardless of its stats. The exception to this is when the harder guest generation option is enabled, but even then it's just a binary threshold of having certain stats in order for them to attract any guests. Once guests are in the park, the intensity, nausea and excitement ratings will have an effect on which ride the guests will actually go on, but it doesn't matter for attracting guests to the park. This means that in a park where guests prefer gentle rides, a bunch of ultra intense rides will attract a lot of guests, but they'll never ride any of them. Ride music does even less. I've heard people say that they always build a merry-go-round near the park entrance as the music attracts guests, but that's just not the case. The only thing that music can do is put the thought about the music being nice in their heads. Speaking of the merry-go-round, there is a very widely believed myth that if one gets the control failure breakdown and doesn't get fixed quickly enough, it will explode. While this breakdown is hilarious enough for me to have made 2 videos about it, it unfortunately will not lead to any kind of explosion if it's not fixed. You can safely let your guests become super nauseous from being on this thing for 2 hours, which actually will also not happen, that was just a joke. Nausea is also not a stranger to myths. The idea that guests will throw up in toilets or litter bins is quite widespread, but ultimately that's just a myth. Not only do many places on the internet say it, but even the manual of RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 says to place bathrooms next to ride exits to combat nausea, despite that not doing anything. In reality, the only two places that the guests will throw up are on the path and in first aid stalls. Guests will actively seek out the nearest first aid stall if their nausea rating is 200 out of 255 or higher, so having those around nauseating rides will help. They may still throw up on the path before getting there though. Sick guests may also look for a bench to sit on, which slowly reduces their nausea over time. Now for a myth that I used to believe as a kid. In RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 you can get the award for having the best park in the country. I'm not sure what exactly the requirements are, but me and my brother sometimes got it. However, we also believed that there was an award for the best park in the world, and that you would get it if you got your park rating to 1000. Naturally, we never got this award as your park rating cannot go above 999, and the fact that this award is completely fictional doesn't help either. Actually, while writing this video, I discovered that the award for the best park in the country probably doesn't exist either. I absolutely remember getting it as a kid, but I searched for it online and the only result I got was a Reddit post from 5 years ago where I mentioned the same award. So I started up RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and built a big popular park that is about as close to perfect as possible. I got many different awards about having the best something in the country, but never just the best park in the country in general. I guess I'm not immune from having wrong memories, and the most likely culprit for this is the award for the best value park in the country, as it's just one word off. I'm not the only one inventing fake awards though. I found this post from November 2002 on a forum about awards in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. Most of these do exist, but the cleanest footpaths, worst scenery and most food stalls awards have never existed in either RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 or 2. Next up are the many different guest name cheats that are completely made up. There are a lot of different names that you can give to your guests that do have effects, so naturally people also came up with a whole bunch of fake ones. A quite common one is naming your first two guests E equals MC squared and E equals MC cubed, after which they would grant you a massive boost to ride research. I have no idea where this comes from, but I found an old website that already listed it in the year 2000. In fact, most of these supposed cheat codes on this website are complete fiction. A bunch of the guest name cheats above are in the game, but Big Bucks, another common fake name cheat, is not, just like Tony Day and John Mace. I have found a few more fake ones. This forum post also has John Mace and Tony Day, but in addition says that naming a guest Richard Tan will turn them into a pickpocket. At least the other two names have realistic effects that could exist, but the pickpocket is just so random. It's not as weird as what's above this though, where it says that if you name a guest 1456 Rover and another guest Spots, they'll turn into dogs and chase the ducks in Trinity Islands? What? What kind of paint thinner were they sniffing when they thought up this nonsense? Onto something more practical. Park maps are a very misunderstood item and there are many different beliefs around it. From believing that they made sure your guests never got lost to that they don't really help at all. The truth is that park maps do help, but aren't perfect. A guest that has a map will attempt to locate a ride to go on 4 times as frequently as a guest without a map, and they will consider all rides in the park instead of just the nearby ones. A map also allows guests to look more junctions ahead to calculate the precise path to their destination instead of just a general heading. If you want to learn more about this, you can watch this video about the park map by Dirklink. There's also the myth that observation towers help with pathfinding. Once again, this is perfectly logical, but at the same time completely fictional. The same goes for banners and signs. It makes sense that putting the direction or name of a ride on it helps the guests find it if they walk past it, but they don't do anything. Some rides, like the bobsled coaster and the dinghy slide, can fly off the tracks and crash if they go over a hill too fast. This is true. However, many people believe that they can also do this in turns, which is not true. Even this train traveling at several hundreds kilometers per hour is completely fine. There is one ride type that can crash in turns though. The ghost train is the only ride in the game that will crash in turns if it goes too fast, making it really annoying to work with and likely the origin of this myth. Many people believe that guests are more likely to buy an on-ride photo if it is put in an exciting location, and that would make sense, but it's not true. It doesn't matter where you put it, as long as the ride has a photo section, the guest has a chance to buy it. The train doesn't even have to pass through it for the guest to buy a photo of what I can only presume is empty track. Handymen can do 4 different jobs, but 2 of them are entirely useless. Mowed grass has absolutely zero effect on anything, but I can't blame people for assuming it does, as it seems like one of those things that would do something. Withered flowers also have no negative effect at all. Well, they do have a negative effect on me, as I hate looking at them, but the game doesn't care. Another myth is that exchange rates exist in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2. I have gotten so many questions about what a certain price is in dollars after I mention it in euros. The answer is, they're the same, and so are pounds and many other currencies. And thank God it is, as it would be really annoying to have to look up exchange rates from 20 years ago to convert prices. Not all currencies are exactly the same though, but when they differ it is always by a factor of 10, 100 or 1000. For example, a merry-go-round costs 460 US dollars, 4,600 Czech koruna and 46,000 Japanese yen. One of the misconceptions I want to address is one that I started by accident. Several people believe that the color of a guest's shirt or pants influences things like their intensity preference or, more commonly, their weight. This is not true. The color of their clothes has no effect on anything whatsoever. The source of this myth is a video about the weight of guests that I made 4 years ago. To make things easier to visualize, Broxier made a custom version of OpenRCT2 for me where every guest would get a certain color of pants and shirt according to their weight. This was never in the original game or even any released version of OpenRCT2. It was made purely to make it easier to see the guest's weight, as you can't see it anywhere else. To this day, I still occasionally get questions about whether the weight of a guest changes when they buy a differently colored shirt. It doesn't. Their weight cannot change and has nothing to do with anything. It's just a random number that they get assigned when they spawn that affects how fast ride vehicles go. I learned about some of these myths and misconceptions by asking you guys on my community page. Apart from some common ones that I had heard before and that we have already discussed, there were a whole lot of very specific ones that I had never seen before, so here's a bunch of those. Pretty balloon colors sell better than ugly balloon colors. Bumper cars can fly off the track and kill the rider. Entertainers don't do anything. This one can be kind of true, as a good park might have no need for an entertainer, but in certain situations they're absolutely overpowered. Guests will buy less food from a stall that is placed next to a bathroom. Guests need to pee from anxiety when queuing for high intensity rides. If you paint coasters bright colors, guests can recognize them in the rain, as told by an older sister. I wonder how many of these are just things made up by siblings trying to have a laugh. 2 vandals will fight each other. Umbrellas having a floor? And that there was a massive mega park under a glass dome that slowly got destroyed by repeated earthquakes. These are all absolutely hilarious and complete nonsense. I'd love to see 2 vandals fighting or bumper cars crashing, but I fear that will remain only a dream. Lastly, a fun myth that pops up every now and then is the one about rival parks. People don't tend to believe this anymore, but they do talk about believing it as a kid. The idea is that there is some rival park that you are competing with and that you can lower their park rating by crashing rides off the map into their park. This obviously doesn't exist in any capacity, and the myth likely came from parks like Funtopia, where you own 2 separate sections on different sides of a road. Those were some common myths in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2. Let me know in the comments which you believed and if I forgot any. To learn all about guest emotions, to clear up any myths you might have about that, click right here. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.